Good morning, my littles. Hi. Wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey. And it's time for school. And TT Libby has the best book for that. It's called Miss Nelson is Missing by Harry Allard. Miss Nelson is missing. The kids in room 207 were misbehaving again. Spitballs stuck to the ceiling. Paper planes whizzed through the air. They were the worst behaved class in the whole school. Now settle down, said Miss Nelson in a sweet voice. But the class would not settle down. They whispered. They giggled. They squirmed and made faces. They were rude during story hour. They refused to do their lessons. Something must be done, said Miss Nelson. The next morning, Miss Nelson didn't come to school. Wow! Yelled the kids. We can really act up now. And they began making spitballs and paper planes. Today, let's just be terrible. Not so fast, hissed an unpleasant voice. A woman in an ugly black dress stood before them. I am your new teacher, Miss Viola Swamp. She rapped on the desk with a ruler. Where is Miss Nelson? Asked the kids. Never mind that, snapped Miss Swamp. Open those arithmetic books. And Miss Nelson's kids did what they were told. They could see that Miss Swamp was a real witch. She meant business, and right away she put them to work and loaded them down with homework. We'll have no story hour today, said Miss Swamp. Keep your mouth shut, said Miss Swamp. Sit perfectly still, said Miss Swamp. And if you misbehave, you'll be sorry, said Miss Swamp. And the kids in 207 had never worked this hard. Days had gone by and there was no sign of Miss Nelson. The kids missed Miss Nelson. Maybe we should try to find her, they said. And some of them went to the police. Detective McSmog was assigned to the case. He listened to their stories and scratched his chin. He said. I think Miss Nelson is missing. And Detective McSmog would not be much help. The other kids went to Miss Nelson's house. The shades were tightly drawn, and nobody opened the door. The fact the only person they saw was the wicked Miss Viola Swamp coming up the street. If she sees us, she'll give us more homework. And they got away just in time. Maybe something terrible happened to Miss Nelson. Maybe she was gobbled up by a shark, said one of the kids. But that didn't seem very likely. Sharks, very unpleasant. I like that part. That was one of my favorite parts as a kid because I love sharks. Maybe Miss Nelson went to Mars, said another kid. But that didn't seem likely either. I know, exclaimed the know-it-all. Maybe Miss Nelson's car was carried off by a swarm of angry butterflies. But that seemed the least likely of all. The kids in 207 were very discouraged, and it seemed like Miss Nelson was never coming back, and they'd be stuck with Miss Swamp forever. They heard footsteps down the hall. Here comes the witch, they whispered. Hello, children, said someone in a sweet voice. It was Miss Nelson. Did you miss me? She asked. We certainly did, said the kids. Where were you? That's my little secret. How about story hour? Oh, yes. And Miss Nelson noticed that during story hour, nobody was rude or silly. What brought this lovely change? She asked. It's our little secret. Back at home, Miss Nelson took off her coat and hung it in the closet right next to an ugly black dress. And when it was time for bed, she sang a little song. I'll never tell, she said to herself with a smile. P.S. Detective McSmog is working a new case. He is now looking for Miss Viola Swamp. Okay, my littles. Time to give me a kiss. And it's off to school with you. Bye.